Yes, sir.
Your slide is visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, we'll start, right? Shall we start?
Yes, sir, proceed.
Okay. Um, Start the recording, Pradyumna. Okay, we'll be talking about allergic rhinitis today mainly, and various other forms of rhinitis as far as rhinology is concerned. Rhinitis as such is an exhaustive topic, so I'll be dealing only with allergic rhinitis and give a gist of various other rhinitis forms. What is allergic rhinitis? Allergic rhinitis is an IgE, that is immunoglobulin E mediated inflammatory nasal condition resulting from allergen introduction in a sensitized individual. That is, the individual should be already sensitized to the allergen, and when it is presented a second time, then the patient will develop an inflammatory cascade. I think you all are fresh from pathology. You will be knowing about the type 1 hypersensitivity a lot. And allergic rhinitis is, of course, a type of type 1 hypersensitivity. Allergic rhinitis includes three cardinal symptoms, that is sneezing, excessive sneezing, not just sneezing, excessive sneezing, nasal obstruction, and profuse mucoid discharge. The prevalence ranges from 10 to 40% depending upon the geographic location, and the incidence is high in children more than 2 years of age. Allergic rhinitis is divided into seasonal allergic rhinitis and perennial allergic rhinitis. Seasonal allergic rhinitis is because of these the pollen grains during farming. These are the main source of allergy in seasonal allergic rhinitis, whereas dust mite, animal dander are all causes of perennial allergic rhinitis. Am I audible and clear? The slides are visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. The recent classification, the ARIA guidelines, where allergic rhinitis is divided into intermittent allergic rhinitis and persistent or perennial allergic rhinitis. Previously, this was seasonal and this was perennial, but now it is intermittent allergic rhinitis and persistent allergic rhinitis. Intermittent allergic rhinitis is less than 4 days per week or less than 4 weeks, whereas persistent allergic rhinitis is more than 4 days per week and more than 4 weeks the symptom persists. That is persistent allergic rhinitis. Any form of allergic rhinitis can be either mild or moderately severe. Moderately severe is wherein the patient has an abnormal sleep. Patients present with what is called as obstructive sleep apnea, which will be dealt with you in other rhinology classes, wherein there is obstruction to the nasal airway and patient is snoring. There is a disturbance in the daily activities of the patient. They have lethargy, tiredness because of this. And there is problems caused in school or work, and there are a lot of troublesome symptoms. Mild variety is when all these symptoms are not present, then it is a milder form of allergic rhinitis. The other classification of allergic rhinitis is a monoallergy or a polyallergy. Monoallergy is wherein a single sensitizing antigen, only one antigen is causing the allergic rhinitis, whereas polyallergy is wherein two or more sensitizing antigens are present. These are the various differential diagnosis for allergic rhinitis or the various forms of rhinitis. In fact, drug-induced rhinitis, rhinitis medicamentosa, occupational rhinitis, chemical rhinitis, smoke-induced rhinitis, infectious rhinitis, rhinitis of pregnancy and hormonally induced rhinitis. All these things I'll be talking about later. Food and alcohol-induced rhinitis, NARS, that is non-allergic rhinitis eosinophilia syndrome, vasomotor rhinitis, age-related rhinitis, empty nose syndrome, atrophic rhinitis, autoimmune granulomatous and vasculitic rhinitis, and rhinosinusitis. The last 4 or 5 will be dealt with in separate classes for you because those are themselves by exhaustive chapters. Going on to the pathophysiology of allergic rhinitis. What is allergic rhinitis as such? You would have read about type 1 hypersensitivity. IgE-mediated allergic rhinitis. There is systemic mechanisms and manifestations because of this IgE-related inflammatory cascade. There is evidence of systemic atopy. It is called as atopic march, wherein there is allergic rhinitis with the associated atopic dermatitis, food allergy, and asthma. It is a Th2 lineage, that is T helper 2 cells lineage adaptive immune response, which is mediated by IgE. The epithelium, the mucosal epithelium, especially in the nose, was previously considered to be just a mechanical barrier protecting the underlying subepithelial tissues from external agents. However, recently it has been found that the epithelium has a greater role in priming the entire immune system to a specific lineage, either a Th1 response or a Th2 response. When an allergen is presented to the epithelium, there are a lot of cascade of reactions taking place, leading to loose gap junctions, and there is release of few inflammatory mediators. The TSLP, the most important of all, the thymic stromal lymphopoietin, TSLP, and then interleukin 25 and 33. These are the inflammatory mediators which prime the body to stimulate the Th2 lineage of response. That is a T helper 2 lineage response or type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. So once the allergen has entered into the subepithelial space, there are the antigen presenting cells in the nose. These are the dendritic cells, which are the antigen presenting cells. They take up the allergens and they go to the draining lymph nodes where the naive T cells are present. And these naive T cells, in the presence of interleukin 4, are converted to the Th2 lineage of cells. This Th2 lineage of cells in presence of interleukin 4 and 13 stimulate the B cells. There is a class switching of B cells which stimulate the B cells to produce IgE, which is specific to these allergens. That is IgE, which is allergen specific IgE. And also these antibodies go and stick on to the effector cells of allergy, that is the mast cells, basophils, and eosinophils. As well as the Th2 lineage cells release these important inflammatory cytokines, interleukin 3, 4, 5, 9, and 13. And these cause activation of the effector cells, that is mast cells, basophils, and eosinophils. The IgE receptor cascade. On the effector cells like mast cells, there's an important receptor, the Fc epsilon R1, wherein the IgE antibodies bind. These receptors are responsible for a cascade of reactions inside the intracellular space when the antigen comes and binds to the IgE antibody, thus cause degranulation of the mast cells and cause release of pro-inflammatory cytokines like histamine, proteolytic enzymes, mainly the histamine, which causes the type 1 hypersensitivity reaction or the inflammatory cascade, leading to vasodilatation, edema, congestion, and rhinorrhea. There is a terminology called as local allergic rhinitis. We already discussed that allergic rhinitis is associated with atopic march. That is, it is associated with the atopic dermatitis, asthma, and all. Whereas there is a condition where the IgEs, the allergen-specific IgE, is situated only in the nose, whereas it is negative in other areas. That is, when you do a skin prick test for allergy, it is negative. This condition is called as local allergic rhinitis. Unified airway concept. We consider the entire airway as a single system from the nose till the tertiary bronchioles. We consider them as a single system. Why? Whatever happens in the nose can also affect the lower airways. Only difference between the upper and lower airways is that lower airways have smooth muscles which cause bronchoconstriction, whereas the upper airways have subepithelial capillaries, arterial systems, and venous cavernous sinusoids. How does the changes in the nose affect the lower airways? There are various mechanisms which have been proposed. Those are the altered breathing pattern, pulmonary aspiration of the inflammatory cells and cytokines, nasobronchial reflex, whereas the most accepted concept is uptake of inflammatory mediators in the systemic circulation. What happens when these inflammatory mediators are taken into the systemic circulation? They go to the regional lymph nodes and as well as the bone marrow, stimulate the inflammatory lymphocytes, that is the basophils, mast cells, and the lymphocyte lineage. And these cells go to the peripheral organs, the other organs, where there is increased expression of surface receptors for chemotaxis of these cells. And thereby they cause hypersensitivity inflammatory cascade in these organs, especially the lower respiratory tract, that is the trachea, bronchi, and the bronchioles. So this is a unified airway concept. In patients with allergic rhinitis, they can present with sleep disordered breathing, dentofacial abnormalities, sinusitis, asthma in the lower respiratory tract, and even in the ears, it can cause a fluid accumulation known as secretory otitis media, which will be dealt with in otology chapters. You can see this. This is the unified airway concept where the nose changes cause secretion drainage and causing the nasobronchial reflex in the lower airways, or nasal congestion, which causes oral breathing. You all know the physiology of nose, right? When there is breathing into the nose, it moisturizes the air, and there is a lot of cascade of events taking place in the nose. When that is not taking place due to oral breathing, then it leads to cold air, dry air reaching the lower airways, causing stimulation of the lower airways and bronchoconstriction. In Th2 inflammation, as I already told, the chemokines are released into the peripheral circulation and they reach the bone marrow, stimulate the type 1 hypersensitivity leukocytes, and they go and affect the lower airways. Is it clear till now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. If there are any doubts, please stop me in between, right? Microbiome. What is microbiome? You all have read about a lot of gut bacteria. The gut bacteria are responsible for maintaining a normal homeostasis in the entire body. They, in fact, maintain a normal, Th1 lineage, and they block the entire Th2 hypersensitivity lineage. They block the Th2 type of T cells, and also they cause a blockage of degranulation of the mast cells, as well as cause apoptosis of these mast cells, thereby preventing type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, especially the bifidobacterium species. When we give a lot of antibiotics, it leads to the dysbiosis, that is altered gut bacteria, that leads to the formation of what is known as the Clostridium species, the Clostridium difficile especially, and this causes the blockage of this entire cascade. That is, they prevent the normal gut bacteria from doing all these activities. Thereby, they increase the chances of type 1 hypersensitivity reaction in the entire body, and this applies even to allergic rhinitis. So because of this inflammatory cascade in allergic rhinitis, there are two types of response: an early response and a late response. So the patients will have an early symptoms and set of late symptoms. Because of the release of inflammatory cytokines, there is an immediate early response leading to sneezing, pruritus. Pruritus is itching in the nose, rhinorrhea, nasal obstruction, and ocular symptoms. Ocular symptoms can be itching in the eyes and watering of the eyes. These inflammatory cytokines can cause endothelial cell activation, which in turn leads to vasodilatation, chemotaxis of leukocytes, the inflammatory leukocytes into the subepithelial spaces, and these cause late phase responses, which leads on to nasal obstruction, rhinorrhea, and nasal hyperresponsiveness to allergens as well as to irritants and atmospheric changes. These are the late phase responses. What are the risk factors of allergic rhinitis? We all know it runs in families. Okay, it is there is a strong inheritance in the families with 70 to 80% heritability in case of allergic rhinitis. There are certain genes which are involved in the allergic rhinitis pathogenesis. These are known as single nucleotide polymorphisms. The most important of these SNPs are TLR1 to 6. One second. So TLR1 to this TLR1 to 6 and LRCC32. These two are the important single nucleotide polymorphisms which are involved in allergic rhinitis. What are the inhalant allergens which predispose to allergic rhinitis? I mean, the main source are the mites, the house dust mites. With the carpets, the sofa sets, the bed sheets, the AC filters, all of them have these mites which can predispose to allergic rhinitis. The pollens during the sowing season, the animal danders, the cat dander, dog danders, fungal allergens, food allergens, especially in newborns, if they are exposed to these food allergens in their early life within 2 years, then they have an increased risk of developing allergic rhinitis in the later part of their life. And then pollution and tobacco smoke, especially passive smoking, can predispose to allergic rhinitis in future. What are the socioeconomic factors? We have read a lot about the low socioeconomic groups being exposed to a lot of infections and communicable diseases, whereas this disease is mainly involving the high socioeconomic sections. The various causes which have been predisposed are the number of siblings. They have less number of siblings, so less interactions, less transmission of infections. Which I've already talked about this gut microbiota. The gut microbiota dysbiosis are present in these individuals. Less episodes of viral infections, less exposure to tobacco smoke, better housing conditions have poorer, more chances of developing allergic rhinitis. Allergen exposure in early life, that is, children who are growing up nearby the farms, they have a better, chances or the lesser chances of developing allergic rhinitis when compared to other children. And dietary factors and nutrition also play a role in allergic rhinitis. What are the protective factors in allergic rhinitis? Breastfeeding. I hope you all have attended pediatric posting, don't you? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
so I think you would have been primed about the importance of exclusive breastfeeding. The first 6 months of the life, the children are exclusively breastfed. Okay, they help in a lot of ways for the child. They prevent in developing non-communicable chronic diseases, as well as hypersensitivity reactions, as well as protection against various infections. Allergic rhinitis is no dissimilar. Allergic rhinitis is also protected by this immunologically complex solution, and it helps in supporting the infant growth as well as the infant immune response. Say no to formula feeds. Never give formula feeds for at least the first 6 months of life. Childhood exposure to pets. Early exposure to pets can cause slow exposure to the allergens, which in turn leads to development of immune tolerance and reduced chances of developing allergic rhinitis in future. The hygiene hypothesis, I already talked about the microbiota hypothesis. The number of siblings, farming early exposure is protective. Bacterial endotoxins are found to be protective against type 1 hypersensitivity reactions, and probiotics, which are given in the treatment, and the microbial diversity, the gut microbiota and skin microbiota. Disease burden of allergic rhinitis. There is a significant effect on the quality of life. They have poor sleep, poor activities, they're always lethargic, tired, and they have significant effect on the sleep. As I told, they have obstructive sleep apnea, daytime sleepiness, lethargy, and societal burden. This societal burden includes economic burden because of use of drugs and spending on drugs, as well as social burdens on the individual. Evaluation and diagnosis. History. History plays a most important part in the initial diagnosis of allergic rhinitis. Patient presents with nasal congestion or obstruction, nasal pruritus or itching, clear rhinorrhea, and sneezing. Clear rhinorrhea means it's a mucoid discharge. Mucoid discharge is different from watery nasal discharge. Where does watery nasal discharge occur?
Viral.
CSF rhinorrhea.
Yes, sir.
Viral.
CSF rhinorrhea, very good. CSF rhinorrhea, when there is a CSF leak, the patients will have a clear, unprovoked watery nasal discharge from the nose. Whereas this is different from that. There is a mucoid rhinorrhea, which is excessive, and there is excessive sneezing in these patients. And associated symptoms include ocular pruritus, erythema, tearing, oral or pharyngeal pruritus, and wheezing or cough. So the patient will present with this kind of red, itchy, and watering eyes, nasal congestion, rhinorrhea, and nasal obstruction, and itching in the throat. They'll constantly keep clearing their throat, and patient will also have fatigue because of excessive sneezing and sleep disturbances. On examination, when you generally look at the patient, they'll be having mouth breathing, nasal itching, and there'll be a transverse supratip nasal crease called as allergic salute or Darier's line. There can be postnasal drip when you examine the throat. What is postnasal drip? What is that?
So secretions entering nasopharynx because of
Yes, through the nasopharynx, it comes into the throat, right? When you examine the throat, there will be secretions dripping on the posterior pharyngeal wall. Okay, that is postnasal drip. And then allergic shiners, that is dark discoloration of the lower eyelids. And when you examine the nose, anterior rhinoscopy, you will see that the entire nasal mucosa is swollen, pale, bluish in color, edematous, and it's covered with mucoid secretions. So this is what the patient does. They keep constantly rubbing their nose with the hand, and this is the allergic shiners, that is dark discoloration of the lower eyelid, and this is the allergic salute or Darier's line. Because of this rubbing of the nose, they develop this line on the supratip, and that is called as the allergic salute. And this is how the nose looks on examination. This is the left side of the nose. This is the left inferior turbinate. This is the septum. You can see how edematous, boggy, bluish in color it is. There's a lot of mucus secretion. You can see there is a lot of mucus secretion. And it is all studded with small, small spots. It is called as a mulberry turbinates, which is typical in cases of allergic rhinitis. If it is not like this, then it will be a pale turbinate, one of these. Okay. Nasal endoscopy shows the same findings which I had shown right now. Apart from this, there is a centrally located inflammation, central part of the nose, that is the superior part of the nasal septum, and the middle turbinate and superior turbinate show some inflammatory changes, that is polypoidal changes can be present sometimes on nasal endoscopy. So this is polypoidal changes in the right middle turbinate, the left middle turbinate, and these are polypoidal changes in the nose on the middle turbinate. This is also middle turbinate polypoidal changes. Middle turbinate polypoidal changes. Radiology. X-ray and CT scan are usually not indicated in cases of allergic rhinitis. It is only done to rule out other causes of rhinitis such as chronic rhinosinusitis, nasal polyposis, etc. Skin prick testing. This is almost the confirmatory test for allergic rhinitis. You can confirm the specific allergens which is causing the allergic rhinitis. It is crucial in also directing for treatment. That is, you can give allergen specific immunotherapy in these patients. The antigen is applied to the skin. This is how it is applied to the skin. You have seen lancets, right, in physiology practicals. Lancets. The lancets are used to apply the allergen to the skin. When the allergen is applied to the skin, then the antigen cross-linking with the IgE antibody occurs, and this causes release of inflammatory mediators, and there is formation of wheal and flare reactions. The sensitivity and specificity of this test is about 80%. What are the contraindications of skin prick test? When patient has severe asthma, there is chances of exacerbation of asthma and respiratory failure. So this is contraindicated in patients with severe asthma, and also patients with severe unstable cardiac disease, concurrent beta blocker therapy, as well as pregnancy. So single lancet or multiple lancet devices can be used where it is done exactly on the volar surface of the forearm and on the back. And when the wheal is more than 3 mm than the control, then it is considered to be positive. So these are the skin prick tests. A whole lot of allergens can be tested on the volar aspect of the hand or on the back of the body. These are the drugs which should be discontinued before doing the skin prick test, especially H1 antihistamines, that is chlorpheniramine maleate, levocetirizine, cetirizine. These drugs should be discontinued 2 to 7 days prior to the testing because they interfere with the testing. H2 antihistamines, that is your ranitidine, cimetidine, they can also interfere with the test results and hence they should also be discontinued. Topical antihistamines like azilastine, they should also be discontinued 2 days prior to testing. Anti-IgE immunoglobulin antibody, that is omalizumab, this also should be stopped in case patient is using LTRA antagonists, that is leukotriene receptor antagonists like montelukast, zafirlukast. These can be continued during the testing because they do not interfere much. Apart from this, those drugs which are used in allergic rhinitis, namely topical corticosteroids and systemic corticosteroids, have found to have not much of effects on the skin prick test, so they can be continued while the test is being done. The next test which can be done from the serum of the patient is total IgE. Total IgE is a very non-specific test. It only tells that the patient has allergic rhinitis and it gives no other further information. We need to know what is the allergen. So we have to do a allergen specific IgE. That is called as radioallergosorbent assay or RAST. It is an in vitro test wherein the patient's serum is collected in a container. An allergen fixed to a substrate is taken, and the patient's serum containing the IgE antibody is added. When this is added, it binds to the allergen and forms an allergen, that is antigen antibody complex. Then the excess serum is washed off. Once that is washed off, then you add a radio labeled anti-IgE antibody. That is, antibody to this IgE antibody is added, and this radio labeled antibody binds to this IgE, the antigen specific IgE antibody. And this can be read by auto analyzers to determine the severity of the allergy to a specific allergen, and this will help a great deal in the management of the patient. This RAS test has a very good safety profile because patient's serum is only used. There's no risk of anaphylaxis as compared to the skin prick test. Multiple allergen screening can be done. It can be used to determine the severity of allergic rhinitis, selection of candidates for allergen immunotherapy, and to determine the most relevant allergen. I already talked about the local allergic rhinitis. Local allergic rhinitis is wherein the patient has a positive history of allergic rhinitis, but when you test for the allergic rhinitis, that is skin prick test and RAST will be negative in these patients. Nasal allergen challenge test. This is considered to be the gold standard of testing allergic rhinitis. However, it is very cumbersome to do this, and hence it is not available in all the centers. They consist of environmental exposure chambers or allergen challenge chambers. This is mainly used for understanding the pathophysiology of allergic rhinitis, that is in research work, as well as to determine the dose of allergen immunotherapy to be given. So these are the allergen challenge chambers. You can see how big they are, the space occupying, and they are very cumbersome to do, and hence they are more often used in research purpose than the routine testing. This is a simple test, nasal cytology and histology. You take a nasal smear sampling or biopsy from the nasal mucosa and stain it with Giemsa stain and examine under the microscope. This allergic rhinitis will show predominantly type 1 hypersensitivity cells like eosinophils, mast cells, and basophils. So this is an allergic rhinitis smear showing an excessive eosinophils and mast cells in the smear. Going on to the management of allergic rhinitis. This is the main, this is a mainstay of treatment, allergen avoidance. Try to find out what is the allergen and avoid it. Most common allergens are the house dust mites. You can see the mites in the dust, and these are very notorious, the pollens in the farms which are responsible for seasonal allergic rhinitis. And you should also avoid these pets in case you have allergic rhinitis. Going on to pharmacotherapy, antihistamines. These are the most commonly used, in fact, one of the first line therapy drugs in treatment of allergic rhinitis. especially H1 antihistamines. The first generation ones, diphenhydramine, chlorpheniramine maleate. CPM was extensively used in the initial phases. The problem with these first generation antihistamines were that they cross the blood-brain barrier, cause sedation, drowsiness, and lot of fatigue. And also they are degraded in the liver. They inhibit the cytochrome P2D6 enzymes, and hence they cannot be used with other drugs like the anti-epileptics, phenytoin, which is degraded in the liver, which causes haphazard activity of phenytoin if used in combination. To prevent all these adverse effects, there are newer generation antihistamines like cetirizine, levocetirizine, fexofenadine, loratadine, desloratadine, and recently belastin has also been added to this list. These drugs cause a lesser sedation because they cause the blood-brain barrier penetration is less in these drugs. The newer generation antihistamines, few of them are known to cause arrhythmia and QT prolongation, especially astimazole, and hence it has been discontinued from use. Till now, is it clear for everyone? I'm talking and no one is
Yes.
responding.
Yes, sir. Clear.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. 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 Right. Very good. Okay. Now, the intranasal antihistamines. These are the two drugs which are available through the intranasal routes, namely the azilastine and olopatadine. They are used as monotherapy in allergic rhinitis. They are also one of the first-line drugs. There are only three main first-line drugs in allergic rhinitis, namely the H1 antihistamines, oral H1 antihistamines, intranasal antihistamines, and the most important of all is intranasal corticosteroids. I'll be dealing with it. These intranasal antihistamines are well tolerated. The only problem is that they cause an unpleasant taste because they drip into the throat. The other side effects can be somnolence, headache, and epistaxis. Oral corticosteroids. We all know these corticosteroids have a a very good effect against various inflammatory cascades. They have a well demonstrated anti-inflammatory effect in allergic rhinitis as well. Especially prednisolone and methylprednisolone are being used only in very severe cases, and that too over a short period, only for a few days, 4 to 5 days, because of the known systemic side effects. They cannot be used over a long period of time. Injectable corticosteroids like betamethasone, methylprednisolone can also be used in severe cases, but only again short duration because of the systemic side effects. You know, they cause a whole lot of systemic side effects: osteoporosis. Is it visible?
No,
Hello?
sir.
No, sir.
One second. Now?
No, sir.
Hello?
No, sir.
Visible? Slide is visible?
No, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
We know there is a lot of side effects like osteoporosis, hyperglycemia, raised BP in hypertensive individuals. It causes elevation of blood pressure. In the eyes, it causes glaucoma, cataract, and various other conditions. So intranasal corticosteroids is the first line and mainstay of treatment in treatment of allergic rhinitis. It causes significant reduction in nasal symptoms and eye symptoms. It is superior to, in fact, H1 antihistamines and leukotriene receptor antagonists. Beclomethasone has been used, and fluticasone, and recently mometasone. Fluticasone and mometasone are used in the form of sprays, whereas beclomethasone rescues are used in the form of washes in the treatment of allergic rhinitis. Problem with these drugs is they can cause dryness, burning, stinging, blood ditch secretions, and epistaxis. The other complications can be, if it's directed towards the septum, it can cause septal perforation, but there have not been established cases of other complications like ocular pressure, increased ocular pressure, glaucoma, lens opacity, cataract formation, and in fact, no known systemic side effects like osteoporosis or altered blood glucose levels. However, there are few studies which have shown that they may affect the growth in children, and hence in children these drugs should be used with caution. Decongestants. Oral decongestants are phenylephrine, pseudoephedrine, which are commonly used. They can be used in a combination with antihistamines. They are only adjuncts to the routine drugs. The problem with these drugs is they cause nervousness, anxiety, tremor, palpitations, and increased BP. Intranasal decongestants. These are commonly available over-the-counter medications, oxymetazoline, xylometazoline. You all would have used it, Nazivion, Otrivin. These are very dangerous drugs. It should be used only for a short period of time, 2 to 3 days maximum. We should not use it beyond that because it can cause what is known as the rhinitis medicamentosa. Because of this, I'll be dealing with it later. This is a very troublesome condition, so these drugs should not be used over a long period of time. The other side effects are nasal burning, stinging, dryness, epistaxis, and mucosal ulceration. Leukotriene receptor antagonists are montelukast and zafirlukast. They have a well-demonstrated symptom reduction with monotherapy. However, they are still inferior to intranasal corticosteroids, and they are used only when INCS and antihistamines are contraindicated. Cromolyn
The slides are
sodium,
not
that is,
changing, sir.
where is it right now?
Sir, after injectable corticosteroids, it's not changing, sir.
Oh, it's not changed. One second.
Okay, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
இப்போ தெரியுதா slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So injectable corticosteroids, betamethasone, methylprednisolone, and intranasal corticosteroids are, I already told you, it is the first line of treatment. It reduces nasal symptoms and eye symptoms. It's superior to H1 antihistamines and LTRAs in controlling nasal symptoms. Beclomethasone is used as respules to used as nasal wash, whereas fluticasone and mometasone are used as nasal sprays. These cause dryness, burning sensation, stinging sensation, blood-tinged secretions, and epistaxis. If it's directed towards the septum, they can cause septal perforation. However, there is no significant systemic side effects such as glaucoma, cataract formation, increased blood pressure, or hyperglycemia. There are a few studies which have shown that they affect growth in children, and hence these intranasal corticosteroids should be used with caution in children. Decongestants, the oral decongestants are phenylephrine, pseudoephedrine. They are usually used in combination with antihistamines. They can cause nervousness, anxiety, tremor, palpitations, increased BP. Intranasal decongestants, I already talked to you about this, the oxymetazoline, xylometazoline. These can cause rhinitis medicamentosa, so they should be used only for a short period of time, for 1, 2, or 3 days maximum, not more than that. They can also cause nasal burning, stinging, dryness, epistaxis, and mucosal ulceration. Leukotriene receptor antagonists, the montelukast and zafirlukast, they have a demonstrated symptom reduction with monotherapy, but they are inferior to intranasal corticosteroids, and hence they can be used only if both intranasal corticosteroids and antihistamines are contraindicated. Cromolyn sodium or disodium chromoglycate is a mast cell stabilizer. It prevents degranulation of mast cells and hence prevents histamine release and inhibits chemotaxis of macrophages, eosinophils, monocytes, and platelets. It is available in inhaled form and is used in seasonal allergic rhinitis. And this is also less effective as compared to intranasal corticosteroids. Intranasal cholinergics like ipratropium bromide, they help in reducing the significant rhinorrhea. However, they do not have much effect on the other symptoms and they have less systemic side effects with the therapeutic dosing. The biologics, the monoclonal antibodies like omalizumab, which is an anti-IgE antibody, mepolizumab, that is anti-interleukin 5, and omalizumab in combination with allergen immunotherapy. These drugs are right now FDA approved only in the treatment of asthma, severe asthma, and they have not got FDA approval still for treatment of allergic rhinitis. Nasal saline, this is a magic drug, a wonder drug. In fact, it is used as a, it's just a simple saline. It is an adjunct to the treatment in allergic rhinitis. It can be used as a hypertonic, that is 3% normal saline, 3% saline, isotonic, that is normal saline or 0.9% saline, seawater, buffered or non-buffered. Hypertonic saline is very useful as compared to the other constituents. This is how the nasal irrigation is done with neti pots or syringes. It washes away the entire allergens from the nose when it is done at least twice a day. There is a significant improvement in nasal symptoms, and it's a very good adjunct to intranasal corticosteroids. The probiotics, as I already said, the dysbiosis in the gut bacteria can be improved with probiotics, which has some effects on seasonal and perennial allergic rhinitis. Immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is considered to be the last option in cases of where they have failed the other pharmacotherapies. This involves scheduled administration of allergen extracts at effective doses with the goal of instituting a sustained immunological change. The patient develops an immunological stability and responds less when on further exposures to the allergen. These are the various recombinant allergen extracts which are being used: recombinant allergens, peptide constructs, chemical modifications like alum salts, allergoids, adjuvants like TLR9, TLR4. These are the various constructs which are used in allergen immunotherapy. The various methods of administration of immunotherapy: the subcutaneous immunotherapy, sublingual immunotherapy, transcutaneous or epicutaneous immunotherapy, and intralymphatic immunotherapy. The subcutaneous immunotherapy is most commonly used. However, it is not free of side effects. The sublingual immunotherapy is a safer option. The intralymphatic immunotherapy is a newer addition wherein the allergen is directly injected into the regional lymph nodes, which produces a robust inflammatory reaction. This involves the repeated administration of an allergen extract in order to induce a state of immunological tolerance or immunological stability. There's a significant reduction in clinical symptoms. Also, there's reduction in other pharmacotherapeutic agents which are being used by the patient. How does it act? It acts by blunting of seasonal increases in allergen-specific IgE. It increases by blocking IgE antibodies. So, sorry, it's not IgG, it's IgE antibodies. Inhibition of recruitment and activation of inflammatory cells, namely the mast cells, eosinophils, and the other inflammatory cells. What are the inclusion criteria for immunotherapy? IgE-mediated disease, inability to avoid the allergen, inadequacy of drug treatment, limited spectrum of allergies. That is, if patient has one or two allergens to which they are allergic to, and patients understanding the risks and limitations of the treatment. The contraindications are coexistent asthma, patients taking beta blocker, other medical or immunological diseases, children less than 5 years of age, and pregnancy. How is it given? The injectable form, the subcutaneous immunotherapy, is given as weekly injections for 8 to 16 weeks, followed by injections at 4 to 8 weeks intervals for 3 to 5 years, which is a maintenance phase. What are the side effects? They can cause local reactions following immunotherapy injections, and systemic reactions may occur in up to 10% of the patients, including anaphylaxis, have been reported with the subcutaneous immunotherapy, whereas a safer option for this is a sublingual immunotherapy, which has no reports of anaphylaxis till date. Surgical treatment: the role of surgery in allergic rhinitis is very, very limited. It's mainly a pharmacological treatment. The only best surgical option available is inferior turbinate reduction. You saw those pictures, how the inferior turbinate is edematous, boggy, and you can surgically reduce this inferior turbinate size, and thereby there's significant improvement in nasal congestion, nasal obstruction, as well as response to the exposure to allergens at future is also seen some reduction with inferior turbinate reduction. Septoplasty has no much role in treatment of allergic rhinitis. It does not control the rhinorrhea and sneezing. Vidian neurectomy and posterior inferior nasal nerve section. You all know what is Vidian nerve, right? What is Vidian nerve?
Nerve of pterygoid canal.
Yes, the nerve of pterygoid canal. It supplies the parasympathetic postganglionic parasympathetic fibers to the mucosal glands in the nose, as well as the lacrimation of the eyes. And when you do a video neurectomy through the transnasal endoscopic technique, there is a significant improvement in allergic rhinitis, but it is not without complications. This posterior inferior nasal nerve is also a branch from the the pterygopalatine ganglion. This also can be sectioned to reduce the secretions in allergic rhinitis. But these procedures are associated with drying, excessive drying, crusting of the nose, as well as reduced lacrimation, dryness of the eyes. So these are usually these procedures are now obsolete. If there are any polypoidal changes in the middle turbinate, then there can be a conservative recontouring of the middle turbinate can be done. Going on to the differential diagnosis or the other forms of rhinitis. Drug-induced rhinitis, drugs can cause rhinitis by local inflammatory effect, neurogenic, or various other mechanisms which are not known. The local inflammatory effect is caused by NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the COX-1, COX-2 inhibitors. They reduce the protective prostaglandin E2 and increase the inflammatory leukotrienes, thereby cause local edema, congestion, and nasal obstruction. The antihypertensives, especially the AC inhibitors, the captopril, ramipril, and vasodilators can affect the autonomic nervous system, thereby causing nasal symptoms like obstruction and congestion. The psychotropics and immunosuppressants also cause nasal congestion in various ways, which are unknown till now. So these are the various drugs, the beta blockers, especially the metoprolol, atenolol, and what is sildenafil?
PG,
Phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor.
phosphodiesterase.
It is a smooth muscle relaxant. It causes significant nasal congestion when it is used. And AC inhibitors like ramipril, captopril, these also can cause nasal congestion. So this I talked about, rhinitis medicamentosa. There's rebound rhinitis caused by prolonged use of topical intranasal decongestant. There's a triad of prolonged intranasal decongestant use, constant nasal obstruction, and poor shrinkage of nasal mucosa. The more and more you use, the less and less it causes shrinkage of the nasal mucosa, and thereby there will be more nasal congestion. There will be more nasal congestion, rhinorrhea, and there's decreased efficacy of the intranasal decongestant. So this is how rhinitis medicamentosa looks like. This is the left nasal cavity, this is the left inferior turbinate, this is the nasal septum. You can see how boggy it is inflamed, there is mucosal ulcerations, and that's what happens if you use it over a long period of time. These are the various intranasal decongestants, the sympathomimetic drugs like phenylephrine, pseudoephedrine, and imidazole derivatives like oxymetazoline, xylometazoline, and nafazolone. How they cause this problem? They decrease the endogenous norepinephrine, thereby upregulation of the parasympathetic system and rebound congestion. They also cause recurrent nasal tissue hypoxia because of vasoconstriction, thereby decrease alpha-2 receptor responsiveness and negative neural feedback. There is also severely damaged epithelial metaplasia and hyperplasia, dilated intercellular spaces, goblet cell hyperplasia, and edema. Treatment involves discontinuing the intranasal decongestant and start on intranasal corticosteroids, systemic corticosteroids, and antihistamines. Occupational rhinitis. Occupational rhinitis, it can be non-allergic as well as allergic. The allergic occupational rhinitis can be due to sensitizing low molecular weight or high molecular weight compounds. Treatment is avoidance of the allergen and the same treatment protocol as allergic rhinitis. These are the various occupational allergens. In bakers, the cereal flours. In healthcare workers like us, the doctors, we use a lot of gloves made of latex and the powder which is used in the gloves. They can be causing significant allergic reactions. And the woodworkers, the wood dust in case of carpenters and chemical factories where a lot of chemicals are involved. Chemical rhinitis are caused by chlorine, ammonia, formaldehyde, and sulfur dioxide. Smoke-induced rhinitis, I already talked about. The passive smoking, it is a neurogenic mediated, non-IgE mediated inflammatory cascade. There is a release of substance P, neurokinin A, and calcitonin gene-related peptide from the nerve endings, which in turn causes the inflammatory cascade. Infectious rhinitis will be dealt with in detail for you in other classes. Rhinitis of pregnancy. This is wherein the last 6 weeks of pregnancy, where the pregnant mother develops the symptoms of nasal congestion and nasal obstruction, and there is complete resolution of symptoms within 2 weeks after delivery. This is mainly because of the hormone progesterone, and the other hormones implicated are estrogen, prolactin, vasoactive intestinal peptide, and placental growth hormone. Progesterone causes significant vasodilatation, progesterone-induced smooth muscle relaxation, and massive expansion of circulatory bed volume, which causes nasal congestion. NAS, this is one of the important topics, non-allergic rhinitis eosinophilia syndrome. That is, there is allergic rhinitis, like there is features of nasal congestion and obstruction. It's a clinical disorder consistent with perennial allergic rhinitis, but when you test, there is absence of atopy, whereas there is eosinophilia in the peripheral smear. There's nasal congestion, profuse rhinorrhea, sneezing, and nasal and ocular pruritus. Patient complains of anosmia, which is more significant as compared to allergic rhinitis. There's a negative skin testing, whereas the cytology shows more than 25% eosinophilia. There's transendothelial migration of eosinophils attracted and activated by chemokines. The interleukins 6, 17, MCP1, and RANTES are important inflammatory cytokines involved. Treatment involves intranasal corticosteroids and topical antihistamines. Vasomotor rhinitis, it's the most common form of non-allergic rhinitis. It's a non-IgE mediated immune response. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. There is nasal congestion, rhinorrhea, postnasal drip, cough, eustachian tube dysfunction, sneezing, hyposmia, and facial pressure. This happens when there's exposure to cold air, climate changes, strong smells, tobacco smoke, changes in sexual hormone levels, physical exercise, and alcohol. Females are more preponderant than males, and treatment is by topical anticholinergics like ipratropium bromide. Thank you, guys. Any questions? Hello? Any questions?
No, sir.
No.
Okay, thank you. I hope you understood something.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Stay safe, people. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.